Brandon was clicking the buttons on the remote control, switching TV channels, but he couldn't find anything good to watch in the evening except the news. Outside the window, a magnificent July sunset painted the sky, and the man could smell the heat of the day and the sea salt wafting in from the open window. He could enjoy mountains, beautiful nature, heat 6 months a year, fishing, plenty of fruit and sunshine to his heart's content. However, Brandon was annoyed by the hustle and bustle of the tourist town. He appeared on the seashore only once a season. The heat made him dizzy, even the waves at the shore made him nauseous, and hiking in the mountains was like torture for the man. Every time his friends suggested it, he dismissed the idea, and instead went to the nearest pub in the evening to sit down with a bottle of cold, foaming beer and forget himself in the monotonous murmurs of the TV. "Brandon, please come to me and hold the colander for me so I can drain the pasta," his wife Maya called from the kitchen. Brandon fidgeted unhappily in his armchair. His wife always interrupted at the most inappropriate times with her stupid requests, such as taking out the garbage, helping with cleaning, sharpening knives, watching the porridge. Brandon put on his slippers and went to the kitchen. "Here, hold it over the sink," Maya asked, grabbing the hot pan handles with a towel. "Can't you do it yourself? Just put it in the sink and pour as much as you want," snapped Brandon, but still held the colander. Brandon grew up in a family where his mother and older sister did everything around the house and in the kitchen. He was never asked to peel potatoes or wash dishes, as his mother believed it was not a man's job. His clothes were always washed, ironed and neatly folded in the boys' closet. By the end of school, Brandon had no idea how to tuck a blanket into a duvet cover, how long to boil dumplings, or how to clean dirt off shoes. Like his father, he upheld family traditions and only went into the kitchen to check if the soup or roast was ready. His father's occupation as a blacksmith compensated for it. It was a rare profession by modern standards, but still relevant and well paid. Little Brandon often hung around his father's blacksmith shop, where he skillfully bent iron bars or forged ornate monograms for another fence. It was not surprising that after his father retired from business, Brandon took over the family business and became a blacksmith himself. At first, the guy was enthusiastic about the business, and there were plenty of orders. The locals knew and remembered Brandon's father's skill, so they returned with new jobs. However, Brandon's craft was not as skillful as his father's, and in a few years he tarnished the reputation of his distinguished relative. It's not that he couldn't do blacksmithing at all, but his work wasn't as light and elegantly airy as his father's. As a result, the business declined, and Brandon eventually resorted to forging souvenirs for tourists, occasionally taking orders for fences and gates. Despite having a steady income, Brandon firmly held the belief that it was shameful for a man to do so-called women's work. His mother and sister were soon replaced by his wife Maya, a modest math tutor. At first it seemed like Brandon had chosen the perfect wife. Beautiful, slender, unobtrusive, a great cook, and she didn't demand anything in particular. But over time the situation changed, and Maya began to advocate for equal responsibilities. Brandon was standing on his ground. No hunger strike or week of eating dumplings from the grocery shop. No room filled with dirt could change his mind. He stubbornly sat in his chair after work and refused to pick up a mop or a rag, considering it beneath his dignity. "Oh, we don't have any cabbage for the salad," Maya exclaimed, looking into the empty vegetable drawer in the refrigerator. "Brandon, please go around the corner to the vegetable shop." Brandon, about to go back to watching TV, rolled his eyes, expressing extreme displeasure. "No way! You stay at home all day, and you should remember to stock up on groceries. You'd think a couple of hours of video chatting a day is hard work." "I'm not going," Brandon muttered. "Then you mix the pasta and gravy, sprinkle on the cheese and herbs, and I'll go to the store in the meantime," Maya said patiently. "What else?" the blacksmith snorted. "Should I clean the floors too?" "That would be nice," Maya said patiently. Instead of answering, Brandon went into his bedroom, scuffing his slippers on the linoleum. Maya sighed and started cooking. Today they will have dinner without salad, as it had been many times before. Later that evening, Maya sat at her friend's house drinking tea and complaining about her lazy husband. "Is he still refusing to help?" Casey asked, diligently squeezing lemon into her tea. "You know how he is," Maya sighed, sitting across from her and unwrapping a chocolate candy. "He doesn't even want to talk about cleaning or the kitchen." "Look, just leave him alone. There are so many handsome tourists here." Casey nodded meaningfully at the window. "And why do I need them, these handsome men?" Maya answered in the tone of her friend. "Brandon may be grumpy, but he works all year round, brings money into the house and does a good job. And re-educating is just a matter of time. And the main reason is that I love him. I can't help it." "Well, how long have you been trying to re-educate your precious Brandon? 5 years? Or more?" Casey stared at her friend. Maya sighed, realizing her friend was right. Stubborn, Brandon refused to change. But 5 years ago, Maya didn't think it would be such a problem. Back then, Brandon appeared before her as a romanticized knight. On their first date, he even crafted a rose out of thin sheet iron for her, and Maya melted. Her mother always told her that marriage was a lifelong commitment, that she needed to accept her husband's character and show patience and understanding. These same qualities were instilled in her as a teacher and during her time at college. Naive Maya sincerely believed in her mother's advice and the recommendations of her professors. She talked, tried to provide examples and evidence, and compared situations, but it was all in vain. Instead of finding a compromise, the domestic war with her husband only wore her down more and more. "Dear, you should stop eating candy." Casey gently stopped her friend. "Why?" Maya played dumb, even though she knew exactly what her friend meant. "Because you have to buy a new closet soon, and I'm your best friend. So I'm sorry, I'm telling you like it is," Casey mumbled tactlessly. Maya took a large gulp of tea. Casey was right. The more intense the conflict with Brandon became, the more she indulged in eating. She used to run in the mornings and visit her students' homes, but eventually switched to working from home, leading to a decline in her physical activity. Her body responded by gaining extra pounds. "Stop pretending that everything is normal." Casey leaned in and whispered, "Take control of yourself and lose weight." "I'll have to cook separate meals for myself," Maya said sadly. "I'll be stuck in the kitchen all the time, and Brandon won't eat salads and boiled chicken breast." "He can survive on a couple of cucumbers and apples, and, by the way, he can cook for himself. And you'll be even more beautiful," Casey encouraged her, "although, in my opinion, you have no one to try for," she added under her breath, making sure her friend couldn't hear. Maya looked out the window, where a small piece of the sparkling sea was visible. On one hand, she knew her friend was right, and it was time to lose weight. But on the other hand, she longed for harmony, ease, and support from her husband. Then she could easily go on a diet and run around the neighborhood again in the mornings, while it was not too hot. While she couldn't make a firm decision, the candy in the vase continued to dwindle. Brandon was working in the workshop when a snow-white luxury car pulled up to the gate and a beautiful young woman got out of it. "Hello, I need a beautiful wrought iron fence. Can you do that?" "Good afternoon." Brandon hurriedly removed his gloves and wiped the sweat from his forehead. "Yes, I can." Visitors like her were rare in his workshop. The woman was dressed in an exquisite suit, high heels, and she had perfectly styled hair. "Do you have a catalogue with your works or examples?" the woman asked. Brandon hurriedly handed her a folder containing all his father's works. The woman flipped through a few pages and pointed her finger at the intricate fence with curlicues and olive branches. "How much does this one cost?" Brandon stated the approximate cost per metre. It was his father's best work, one that had made him famous far beyond their state. Brandon didn't even consider the possibility of someone wanting to replicate it. When she heard the price, the woman smiled. "Great, it suits me. Do you need something from me? Like a prepayment or contacts?" "Yes, I need to make measurements and receive a partial prepayment for the purchase of metal," confirmed Brandon, already rejoicing in the prospect of a successful deal. The woman nodded and handed him a business card. "Call me tomorrow when you're available to come. See you then," the girl said, and then got into her car and drove away. Only when the car disappeared around the corner did Brandon finally look at the business card in his hand. It had gold-coloured letters on a white, cramped background. Vanessa Staplehorst, lawyer. Brandon greedily studied the business card, which faintly smelled of perfume. That evening, Brandon returned home in a nervous and euphoric state. He rushed from one place to another, digging into his laptop, constantly checking metal prices, and swirling the customer's business card in his fingers. His eyes were burning. Maya couldn't help but notice it at dinner. "Why are you so happy?" she casually asked her husband while putting meatballs on his plate. "I got an important order, and I'm worried not to ruin the deal," replied Brandon. "Oh, that's great," exclaimed Maya. "And who placed the order?" Suddenly, Brandon lost control of his senses due to the barrage of questions from his wife. "What kind of interrogation is this? I already told you it's an important order. Why are you pestering me like a leech?" He swung his palm so vigorously that he knocked the plate and dinner to the floor. Maya pressed her lips together and ran for a broom. Brandon sat on the chair, motionless, while his wife was picking food off the floor and crawling under the refrigerator with a mop, trying to retrieve the meatball. The man silently watched the woman he was married to. He noticed the unsightly folds protruding from under the elastic band of her shorts. Her hands with short nails were without manicure. She had a perpetual ponytail on her head. "I'll sleep in the living room tonight," he informed a disappointed Maya, and left, taking a mug of tea with him. The woman was left sitting on the floor with a mass of questions in her head and shards of the broken plate in her hands. The next day he called Vanessa in the morning, for some reason adding a noble hoarseness to his voice, and arranged to take a measurement at noon. Maya looked at him in surprise, rubbing her eyes from sleep. Brandon had already woken up at 8 a.m. and wandered nervously around the kitchen. He gulped down a mug of coffee and ate 2 sandwiches with sprats and cucumber, which his wife had made without complaint, despite yesterday's incident. Then he put on a colourful shirt and some decent shorts, gathered some documents, jumped into his old BMW, and confidently set off. He had to get to the new prestigious area 70 kilometres from his tourist town. "Why did I eat those sprats? Now I smell fishy," Brandon muttered to himself while driving. He clicked the air conditioner button on the panel, trying to beat the southern heat. Then he searched the glove compartment for a mint or at least water, but alas, it was empty. Already on the way to the customer's house, Brandon stopped the car at a store and bought all kinds of refreshing candies. Why he did it, the man couldn't clearly say. Normally, Brandon didn't care about things like whether he ate onions in his salad for lunch. But today was a special day. Vanessa's house was new, neat, and quite modern. Brandon gathered his strength and rang the bell. "Good afternoon. I'm glad you made it here in this heat. Would you like some iced tea?" The hostess appeared on the doorstep almost immediately, as if she had been waiting for the signal to open the door. "Hello. Honestly, I wouldn't say no," slightly embarrassed. Vanessa, wearing long, light pants and a lacy top, invited him into the house. She sat him at the kitchen table and placed a filled glass with a straw in front of him. "I can make a larger down payment so that you can get started on my order as soon as possible," Vanessa said, taking a seat across from him. "You know, living defenceless alone in a big house and relying only on a door is a dubious idea." "I understand you," Brandon nodded, mentally replaying the last phrase of the pretty customer in his head. "Then let's draw up a contract," Vanessa asked. Contract? I haven't even calculated the amount of work yet." The master smiled perplexedly. Vanessa smiled and took Brandon to the yard to make all the needed measurements. The blacksmith quickly coped with the task, although thoughts about the beautiful customer swarmed like flies in front of his eyes. A little work with a calculator, a couple of sketches in a working notebook with the location of patterns, details of welding and fasteners, and the sum came out so high that Brandon hesitated slightly before voicing it. Then he gathered his thoughts, paused, and told Vanessa the cost of her choice. To his surprise, the woman only nodded and waved her hand at the door, signalling that she was ready to sign the papers. When the terms were approved, the papers were filled out, and Brandon received the prepayment. There was an awkward silence. Vanessa was obviously in no hurry to send him off, and the man didn't want to leave either. The girl gave him a strange, appraising look, which sent a chill down Brandon's spine. "Would you mind giving me a little help?" Vanessa asked, finally tilting her head to the side. "I'll be glad if I can be of any more help," Brandon agreed, swallowing his saliva. "The important papers of one of my defendants fell behind the closet in my bedroom. Will you help this fragile girl move it and retrieve the documents?" Vanessa asked, slapping her thick eyelashes and speaking in the most innocent voice. Instead of answering, Brandon got up from the soft chair, and the woman led him deep into the house. Brandon arrived home late. Maya met him in stretched home shorts, with an algebra book in her hand, and this view did not fit in with his mood at all. Just a few hours ago, he had been embraced by a woman with a flawless body and an undeniably magnetic energy. And now he was back to the routine and the struggle of dividing household chores. Brandon sighed irritably. "Are you going to sleep separately again?" Maya asked cautiously, placing a plate of mashed potatoes and a fried chicken leg in front of him. "Yes," Brandon muttered. "I'm tired. It's a big order. I need to think it over." "So you got it after all. That's good." Maya clapped her hand with joy. In fact, the order was of the least interest to Brandon now. His thoughts were occupied by the woman who had managed to drive him crazy in one day, was firmly lodged in his head. Maya said something about her students, about the fact that children didn't want to study in the summer, about discounts in the grocery store, and about the neighbours. Brandon didn't listen. Even when she asked him to wipe the crumbs off the table, he didn't snap in his usual tone, but just went into his room silently. Maya, perplexed, shrugged her shoulders. Brandon remembered the day not as a day of money, but as a day of love. It was the beginning of his passionate affair with Vanessa. Every day he told his wife that he was going to the workshop, but instead he drove to his mistress. Beyond the threshold of her house, the world that Brandon had long dreamed of began, a world of pleasures where no speck of everyday life could penetrate. Vanessa was 2 years older than him. She was unmarried, childless, and had devoted herself to her career. At age 33, she moved to the coast and bought a house. She skillfully maintained the image of a simple girl, but also skillfully transformed back when the situation demanded it. Vanessa was not accustomed to begging and waiting to be told what to do. She just took, did, went, and spoke first if she needed. This woman was unlike Brandon was used to, but that was what drew him in and fascinated him. 2 weeks of passion went by, which Brandon had to suppress within himself each time he crossed the threshold of his home, and each time it became more and more difficult for him. Brandon didn't even start working on the order. He cared so little about everything around him, except for Vanessa. The fateful evening arrived unexpectedly. After another daytime rendezvous at his mistress's house, Brandon sat down at the table and glumly looked at his wife. Maya was rambling in her usual manner about the news she had learned during the day and neighbourhood gossip. She placed a plate of pea soup sprinkled with dill in front of him and put bread in a basket. The man stared into the plate and noticed that his wife had cut stems into the soup instead of leaves. "What kind of wife are you?" he exclaimed. "Am I supposed to eat logs?" "You know what? To hell all this and you. I'm leaving." "Where are you going?" Maya didn't understand. "As far away from here as possible." The man jumped up and rushed to pack his things. His wife watched in complete shock, confusion and disbelief as he quickly threw everything from the closet into a large travel bag. He then grabbed items from the bathroom, his laptop, work papers, charger cords and other small things, shoving them into his briefcase. "I'm tired and I'm leaving," Brandon declared, already standing on the doorstep with his belongings. "I'm sick of your moralizing and your interference. And go get a manicure at least. As for me, I love another woman." Maya could only open her mouth and stagger to the poof in the hallway. The door slammed shut and footsteps were heard on the stairs. Everything that had just happened seemed like a foolish prank or a bad joke to her. The entire night, Maya was in despair, unable to sleep. She tried calling her husband to reason with him, but the phone said that the subscriber was unavailable. In the morning, Maya called her friend and asked her to come over. "So, your husband ran away?" Casey slammed her hand on the table. "Well, it's no big loss." "But what am I going to do now?" Maya sniffled. "It's my fault. I kept nagging him about the equal divisions of duties. I nagged him to the point where I lost him." "Hey, are you even listening to yourself?" Casey waved her hand in front of Maya's face. "He cheated on you, and you're worried about losing him? You should be happy to be rid of such a burden." "Well, my dear, stop crying," Casey consoled her. "Tears won't help your grief. Instead, think of it as losing nothing with the departure of this jerk." Maya looked at her friend with tearful eyes, with some surprise. "Well, look." Casey put her foot on her leg and began to curl her fingers. "You have your own apartment. You have a job. You will not starve. And you're a good-looking woman." "And Brandon said that I need a manicure. And in general, he constantly insinuated to me that I was fat," muttered Maya. "Darling, it's time to forget what your good-for-nothing husband said." Casey jokingly wagged her finger at her. That evening, Brandon loaded his few belongings into the car and drove to his parents' house. They lived on the other side of the town and were not too happy about their son's return, especially since he could not clearly explain why he decided to leave his wife. They put Brandon to sleep on the old sofa in the living room. His former room was occupied by his sister's little son. Brandon didn't sleep well in his father's house. He kept turning over what had happened in his head, evaluating the impulsiveness with which he had decided to leave. In the morning, thinking it over, Brandon decided that he was a man and was free to do as he pleased, and his decisions were obviously correct, so nothing terrible had happened. Early in the morning he jumped up, had a quick breakfast of his mother's pancakes, cleaned himself up, and not wanting to answer uncomfortable questions, went straight to his mistress. "Brandon!" Vanessa opened the door in a light robe. "Why are you here so early?" "I left my wife," the man joyfully told her the news, standing on the threshold. Contrary to his expectations, this fact didn't bring a smile to his mistress's face. Vanessa in general seemed not to react to him in any way. "Come in, I'll consult a client on the phone and we'll talk." She stepped forward, letting Brandon pass. He sat down on the sofa in the living room and waited for Vanessa to finish her morning work. Even in the hustle and bustle of the morning, she still looked gorgeous. Watching her, Brandon mentally praised himself for his decision. In the end, he couldn't resist, grabbed Vanessa's hand, who was wandering around the room with the phone in her hand, and sat her on his lap. She rounded her eyes, but continued talking about legal matters as if nothing had happened. "How's the work on my order coming along?" the woman asked when she finished talking. "I began to prepare the material, made sketches." Without blinking an eye, lied Brandon. In fact, he hadn't laid a finger on the metal he'd received, and in fact, the last time he'd been in the workshop was over a week ago. Good, Vanessa nodded. I'd like to get it as soon as possible, then I can feel myself safer. You have me. Brandon tapped himself on the chest with his palm. I don't doubt you. Vanessa removed a speck from his shoulder. But it's better to have a fence anyway. Okay, let's get something to eat, and then I have to go to a meeting. I won't be here until tonight. The woman got up from Brandon's lap in a businesslike manner and walked to the kitchen. I thought we'd be together now. Brandon stretched out with a slight disappointment. I should do my work, honey, Vanessa replied deftly, slicing tomatoes, avocado and salmon. Everyone has business. Business brings money, and everyone loves money. And by the way, you will have time to take care of my order. We can spend the evening and night together. Brandon was still a little upset. He was drinking a cappuccino, munching on a sandwich with copious toppings, and for the first time, he couldn't say anything against it. Only a cranky child or an idiot would be outraged in such a situation, and in the eyes of his mistress, Brandon didn't want to look like either of them. The workshop greeted him with the smell of welding, stifling heat, and the burden of obligation. Brandon's attitude towards work had changed since he started sleeping with the one who paid him. Normally the blacksmith would not waste any time and would start the order immediately. But now Brandon would rather shower the woman he loved with roses than sweat in the heat of the workshop, pounding with a hammer. However, the contract had been signed, and avoiding work could have serious consequences. No matter how infatuated he was, it was time for him to focus on business. Brandon put on an apron, sighed, and began adjusting his tools. Casey and Maya were sunbathing on a secluded beach in the hot afternoon. The sea quietly rustled the stones, its waves softly hissing and responding to the cries of seagulls. It playfully foamed at the edge, teasing small crabs sitting on several large boulders. It's been a long time since I've been out for a swim with Brandon, said Maya. I couldn't force him to come to the sea, and he was always against me going alone. He's an idiot. How many times have I told you? Have you stopped grieving over that jerk yet? It's only been a week, Maya said, but you know, the house is cleaner now, and I don't have to wash dishes as often. My dear, you have no idea how many advantages and opportunities open up for an intelligent woman when she gets rid of a leech disguised as a husband. Casey said it in an edifying tone. Maya smiled, but deep down she was still offended and hurt by Brandon's behaviour. She always tried to uplift him, admired his achievements and supported him. Yes, she tried to instill in him a sense of order and an equal attitude towards any kind of work. But was that so bad? What if he files for divorce tomorrow? It would be such a disgrace. Well, what's so shameful? Casey grinned. It's not shame that you should be thinking about, but the joy of regaining your freedom. You love freedom too much, Maya remarked. Of course, Casey perked up. I have a profitable online job. I'm crazy about growing flowers and owe nothing to anyone. If I want, I can go for a walk until dawn. And if I want, I can binge-watch series all day long. No need to cook 3 pots of soup, deal with someone else's dirty laundry. Try living for yourself. I assure you, you'll love it. Maya put her hands behind her head and, through her dark glasses, began to contemplate the coastline. Her friend was right, and Maya was starting to see things differently. She remembered that the romance in her relationship with Brandon had disappeared almost immediately after the wedding. He was completely absorbed in his work in the workshop. Having a wife was just another item on the checklist that he wanted to tick off in life. And Maya, in her love and joy, naively settled into the role of a homemaker, taking care of the house alone. They rarely went out, despite living in a resort area, and when they did go out, Brandon tried not to spend much money and rushed to finish the outing as soon as possible. Maya never received lavish gifts, and flowers were only given on holidays, out of a sense of obligation. But the most hurtful thing was something else. Maya thought that all of this was normal, that everyone lived like this and no one complained. She, being carefree and positive by nature, tried to see only the good in her husband and their marriage. A seagull with a loud noise flew so low that Maya was blown by wind from its wings. You know, you're right. I am going to start running again, eating right. Let's go for walks more often. Well done, Maya. Casey winked at her with a smile. That's right. Live for yourself and enjoy yourself. And don't think about anything bad. It was unusual, and to put it bluntly, expensive for Brandon to drive almost 140 kilometres back and forth every day. But everything paled when he thought of Vanessa. Surprisingly, she did not bring up the subject of his divorce from his wife, although she was obviously happy to spend evenings and nights together. Spending days together was rare, and it annoyed Brandon. He was ready to give up everything for a charming woman, but she did not feel the same way. Vanessa never mentioned moving to her, although Brandon slept there. He didn't like living in his parents' mansion. It was noisy, cramped, crowded. He couldn't sit in silence. While at Vanessa's was cosy, delicious, cool in every sense. One stuffy evening, Brandon was waiting for his mistress near her house. She had gone to court to defend a client. Finally, at the end of the street, the familiar headlights of Vanessa's white SUV showed up. Brandon immediately jumped out of the car. His gut demanded to resent the woman's long absence, but Brandon restrained himself. He greeted his beloved briefly and glanced at the time. It was almost 11. I didn't know the courts were so late, the man remarked casually. No, the trial was over at 6, but after I needed to talk it over with my client and do some paperwork, Vanessa said, taking her bag and an impressive folder of papers from the back seat. Maybe you can make me a duplicate key, so I don't have to wait under the fence like this, Brandon suggested. Vanessa looked at him and chuckled. You could have a great time in some bar nearby. I don't understand why you chose to wait for me right here. Brandon opened his mouth but didn't find anything to object. It was difficult to argue with a self-assured woman. In the house, Vanessa went to take a shower. Brandon was waiting for her. He wanted wildly to eat and to rest in the coolness of the heat of the day. While his mistress had a shower, he poked his nose into the refrigerator and the kitchen cabinets. There was plenty of fruit, vegetables, yogurts, but nothing he used to eat. Usually, on their evenings together, he brought food from the cafe with him, or Vanessa ordered it. Are we having dinner? He asked the woman as she stepped out of the shower, toweling her hair. Vanessa had no time to answer before the doorbell rang. On the doorstep stood a courier with a package from a restaurant. Late dinner passed hurriedly. At the end of it, the time had passed well past midnight. Vanessa got up from the table, kissed Brandon on the cheek and said, I have to go to court tomorrow morning. I want to get some sleep before then. But I missed you so much. Brandon gave Vanessa a meaningful look. But the woman yawned and then rubbed the man's cheek with her finger. We can do whatever we want, honey, but then I'll oversleep tomorrow and lose a money client. I'll also get a fine for not showing up for the meeting. I wouldn't want to jeopardize my career over our whim. But I really need you. Brandon intercepted her hand and pulled her to him. Vanessa shrugged, kissed him on the forehead, and slipped into her bedroom. After a minute she looked out and said, By the way, clean the kitchen tomorrow, since I had taken care of our dinner. I don't like returning to a messy house. And the door, as you leave, slam it from the outside. It will close itself without a key. Brandon looked unhappily at the leftovers, the crumbs on the table, and the empty glasses and containers. Vanessa's commanding tone made him annoyed. The thing that had been madly beckoning to him before was now shadowed by irritation. He quickly wiped the table, cleaned the glasses, and threw away the remaining packaging. As he did so, he realized that he had never seen Vanessa clean or cook. However, Vanessa's house was always clean and uncluttered. There was simply no place for dust to settle. In the morning, Vanessa slipped out from under Brandon's arm and began her usual morning routine. The coffee smelled fragrant and steaming as she took the mug, but something was off, not like it usually was. Vanessa looked at the table and noticed drops of olive oil from yesterday's salads, a peach pit in the corner, and poorly washed glasses with juice stains in the sink. The woman silently reflected on their last dinner as she sipped coffee from a mug. Then she turned on the faucet, carefully washed the mug and saucer, wiped them clean and put them away. In the evening, the sea was beautiful and crowded. People from the beaches flocked to the nearest cafes and strolled along the alleys and streets, searching for treats and entertainment. Maya and Casey went for an evening promenade too. "Well, have you already realized the benefits of a free life?" Casey asked, linking her arm with her friend's as she enthusiastically devoured an ice cream. "I guess I have," Maya nodded. She wasn't lying. With each day that passed without Brandon, Maya's mood and sense of self gradually shifted. From a lonely and sad woman, she gradually transformed into a girl with her own opinions. "Yes, I can see it too," Casey chimed in. "You look fresher and more beautiful, like a painting. Speaking of paintings, look at this." She nudged Maya and pointed to a street painter. Sitting on a folding chair, the artist leisurely shaded something with a pencil in a notebook. On the nearby counter his works were displayed. They were different, in oil and pencil, and in some very intricate technique with foil, tinfoil and glitter. Passers-by would see strange animals, the sea, the faces of elves, and peaceful streets of seaside towns in his paintings. "What can I do for you?" the artist asked, tearing his eyes away from his notebook and noticing the interested women. "We're betting whether you can draw a portrait of my friend," Casey blurted out. Maya stared at Casey, shocked. Her audacity could have embarrassed even a matronly criminal or the director of a plant. "I wonder what you're betting on?" the artist inquired. "If you can't do it, you'll give us any painting of yours we want." Casey became even more daring. "And if I can do it?" The interested man joined the game. "Then we'll pay you double the rate," the woman replied. "Well, that's a very tempting offer," the artist exclaimed, carefully taking another folding chair from the rack and gesturing for Maya to sit down. Red as a tomato, Maya sat down in front of the man, unsure of what to do with her arms and legs. "You can sit however you like. The main thing is not to turn your face away from the light," the artist said softly. He flipped a page in his notebook, sharpened his pencil, and began sketching. The artist's hand made quick, precise strokes, occasionally smudging the lead with his blackened fingers. His brown eyes captured the angles of Maya's jaw, the curve of her eyebrows and the shape of her nose. Maya too stole glances at the artist. He was tall with prominent cheekbones, dark hair, and a remarkably expressive look with refined features. He had a slightly unkempt appearance, forgivable for a creative person. His gaze seemed to penetrate Maya while also lulling her. The movements on the sheet became calmer and smoother. Finally, the artist put a small signature in the corner and turned the notebook over to the women. Maya gazed at the girl portrayed on a sheet of paper. The artist had captured every detail of her face. The expression, the sparkle in her eyes, the modest smile, and even the shadows in her dimples. Casey applauded in admiration. "Bravo! Bravo to the master!" she exclaimed. "Here, as agreed." Casey handed 2 bills to the master. "You did a brilliant job." But to their surprise, the artist refused to accept the promised reward. Instead, he carefully tore the portrait sheet out of his notebook and offered it to Maya. I would like to change the terms, mumbled the master, looking at her. I'll give you the portrait for free, but in return, you'll have dinner with me. Maya was taken aback. It was unexpected and pleasant. A shiver ran down her spine. She accepted the sheet and nodded, looking into the artist's eyes. I'll be waiting for you tomorrow at this restaurant, 7 o'clock, he said, smiling and handing her the portrait. And what's your name? Maya asked as a farewell. Jarrett, he replied in farewell. I hope to know your name tomorrow. The girlfriends continued their walk. Excitedly, Casey chatted about getting ready for the date, offering advice on what to order and which perfume to choose. Maya heard her, but her mind was elsewhere. She was stunned, delighted, surprised and a little afraid all at once. Nothing like this had ever happened in her life before. Maya could hardly believe what had just transpired. Someone was interested in her, but suddenly doubts occurred in her mind. Maya stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. I can't meet him, she said, suppressing an inner impulse. Are you crazy? Casey rolled her eyes. That's exactly what you need. I'm still a married woman. I shouldn't do this to Brandon, Maya exclaimed, clasping her hands together. Casey squinted at her intently. Honey, throw Brandon in the trash. He didn't have a guilty conscience when he left, did he? You're a free woman, and free women have complete freedom of action. But it's wrong. Maya desperately searched for reasons not to do something she desperately wanted to do. Do you really think that going out to dinner with a handsome, charming, charismatic man is wrong? Casey replied, looking at her very seriously. Maya sighed. All right, Maya finally gave in. I'll go. Of course you will, Casey laughed. I remember it's been a long time since you've had a new dress in your closet. Maya realized that she couldn't resist. In the battle between conscience and desire, desire came out on top. Work on Vanessa's order was progressing slower than she would have liked. Less than half of it was finished, as the chosen fence required intricate forging and detailing. Brandon, lacking his father's skill, struggled with the order. However, asking his father for help would be beneath Brandon's dignity, so he continued to make the order with profanity, mistakes, and spoiled material. As for Vanessa, she was too busy to think about her affair with Brandon. Her client's case was in full swing. Finally, on Saturday, Brandon and Vanessa had a day off together. Vanessa lazily stretched in bed, then put on a robe and went out to the kitchen to make coffee. The sound of the shower echoed from the bathroom. Brandon had woken up a little earlier than she had. In the living room, Vanessa noticed a plate of spaghetti carbonara. She had hastily made them the day before, and she and Brandon had enjoyed them while watching a show in the evening. Vanessa remembered putting away her plate and glass. She also asked Brandon to clean up after himself, but now the plate was hidden on the bottom shelf of the coffee table. Vanessa squinted and stepped closer. She picked up the plate and was horrified to find that it had been standing on the important papers inside the table, and now they were ruined with a greasy stain. What are we going to have for breakfast? Rubbing his head with a towel, Brandon looked out of the bathroom door. Vanessa scrutinized the ruined document, already estimating how much time and nerves it would take to get it again. Will a dirty plate and a greasy tabletop suit you for breakfast? Asked Vanessa, running her finger across the surface of the table. I don't get it, Brandon stammered, puzzled at the door. Yesterday's languid evening and gentle woman were too much of a contrast to this morning. You probably didn't understand the cleaning request yesterday either, did you? Said Vanessa, still standing with her back to him. And then Brandon's nature broke through his crush and admiration for his mistress. It was hammered into Brandon's mind too firmly by his mother's hands. I'm not obligated to do this, replied the man. Washing the dishes and clearing the table is a woman's job. Vanessa finally turned to face him. only then did Brandon notice the ruined document in her hand. "So, you're not obligated." "Okay." The woman stretched out. "Then what falls on your fragile shoulders if you can't even carry a dirty plate to the kitchen and rinse it under the faucet?" Brandon realized that his wife never allowed such words. Fighting with her was boring. "I make money," he replied defiantly. Vanessa came closer and in a still calm voice clarified, "But I earn the money too, and I think even more than you do. Now the question is, why do I need a man who can safely be called useless to me?" "Maybe I'll just fix everything and we'll forget this conversation," Brandon squeezed out with an effort. "You know, Brandon, I can't stand people who can't be relied on," Vanessa replied. "It's a pity that it's impossible to make a contract for dishwashing with an indemnity for damaged property." Saying this, Vanessa pulled a folder out of the shelf, slipped a greasy sheet of paper into it, and then began to make a phone call. The woman actually paid no attention to her lover, who was frozen in the middle of the living room. "Get ready, I need to go on business," Vanessa threw to him briefly after 10 minutes. "You said you didn't have plans for today," Brandon said, not even realizing yet how he had gotten himself into trouble. "Thanks to you, I've gotten them." Vanessa froze in the doorway with her car keys, showing that she didn't intend to wait long. Brandon hastily dressed, picking up his backpack. Already sitting in his car, he watched as his mistress drove away. Brandon guessed that something bad had happened, but hoped that in the evening everything would be the same. "Maya, what a grandmother's outfit you're wearing." Casey was indignant, looking at her friend. "You'll think you're a crazy cat lady. Take it off at once." Maya obediently began to pull off her flowered t-shirt and black pants. "All right, couturier," said Maya with a smile. "What do you suggest I should dress up in?" "Well, certainly not what you usually wear," Casey grumbled. "The last time I went on a date was 5 years ago," Maya said, "and I have absolutely no idea what people wear now." "Stop complaining, Grandma Maya," Casey answered, laughing. "You think much has changed in 5 years? Standards and preferences are still the same. Skirts, blouses, dresses." Maya couldn't stand it and made a face, mimicking her friend. She was nervous and worried, but at the same time, she really wanted to see Jarrett again. "What about your white sundress with the inserts on the back?" Casey suddenly exclaimed. "The one I took a picture of you in on the shore. Put it on." "What?" "Well, but my back will be open," Maya protested. "No, I'll look silly." "On the contrary, my dear. In your worn-out t-shirts, you look like a turkey in socks," chuckled Casey, rushing to rummage through the closet. Maya obediently waited. Soon Casey pulled out a nicely ironed sundress and handed it to her friend. Maya hesitantly entered the room wearing the sundress. "Well, there you go. Quite a transformation," Casey exclaimed, even jumping up from the sofa where she had been sitting. "You're very beautiful and feminine in it, and you won't get too hot." Maya looked at herself uncertainly in the mirror. A smiling red-haired woman in an ankle-length white linen sundress stared back at her. The outfit accentuated her waist nicely. "I know what else you need," Casey said, raising a finger before scurrying out the door. Living in a neighbouring house, Casey soon returned with a small straw shoulder bag and sandals in the same style. The overall image was minimalistic, modest and pure. Maya didn't immediately recognize Jarrett. His paint-stained shirt and dishevelled hair were gone. He was wearing a simple white cotton t-shirt and white pants. "I see that we're both in white. How interesting," Jarrett remarked once they were seated. "I love that colour." Maya discreetly continued to gaze at the artist. "Why?" "White colour is associated with beginnings for me. When I pick up a blank canvas or a sheet of paper, those thoughts usually come to mind. White is impassive and pure, Jarrett explained. May I know your name? Maya introduced herself. Suddenly she stopped feeling shy and timid. She no longer fidgeted with her skirt or watched her watch. A sense of calm, comfort, and relaxation washed over her, despite the music and the other patrons in the restaurant. These feelings emanated from Jarrett. Maya involuntarily compared her perceptions of Brandon and Jarrett. Brandon was nervous, irritable, and somewhat lost in his thoughts. Jarrett exuded a calm and confident demeanour. Their conversation flowed as if they had known each other for years, but hadn't seen each other in a long time. Jarrett turned out to be a brilliant conversationalist. He lived in the capital, but every summer he moved to the south and rented a picturesque attic from a friend at a nominal fee. It served as his cosy and creative studio, filled with professional chaos. The artist listened attentively to Maya's stories about tutoring. With a smile, he asked why she didn't tan at all, living at the seaside. The girl felt embarrassed and honestly confessed everything that had happened a few weeks ago. Jarrett listened intently and then spoke. I don't want to be intrusive. If you're still in love with your husband, or tormented by your conscience, we can stop at today's meeting. No, Maya involuntarily interrupted him. I would like to meet you again. You seem nice and understanding, she blurted out, not quite understanding why. I like you too, Jarrett replied with a slight smile, winking at her and gently touching her hand. I decided to invite you to dinner the moment you approached me with your friend in the alley. And I probably would agree right then, Maya smiled back and brushed Jarrett's little finger with her thumb. Shall we escape from here? He whispered, leaning closer to her. I'd love to, the girl agreed. Jarrett quickly paid for their dinner and then slipped away from the noisy establishment. They went through the alley first and then through narrow yards until they reached the beach. Maya took off her sandals and happily walked barefoot on the warm sand. They strolled along the shoreline, gradually moving away from the bustling alley. The sea was almost completely calm, with small waves barely touching the sand. As the lights on the promenade dimmed, the lilac and green sparkles in the water became visible. The bioluminescent glow is mesmerizing, isn't it? Jarrett said, sitting down and scooping some water into his palm. It slipped through his fingers, sparkling like liquid fire. Yes, I've never seen this phenomenon, although I've lived by the sea since I was 15, Maya said, looking at the small lights with fascination. Have you ever seen how the water turns pink at dawn? Jarrett asked, looking at her. Maya shook her head, feeling like a newcomer tourist who was just getting acquainted with the coast and all its secrets. Let's wait until dawn, and you'll see, the artist suggested. Here? I'll probably fall asleep. Maya looked around uncertainly. Why here? Jarrett stood up, shaking the water off his hand. From the windows of my attic, you can see the dawn in all its colours. If you don't mind coming. Maya opened her mouth to refuse, but something stopped her. Morality, conscience, and shame were mixed into a seething mess, but through them something shone, something calm, good and inspiring, infinite trust and faith in miracles. I don't mind, Maya said, extending her hand to Jarrett, and they walked along the water again. Brandon spent the day after the strange conversation in the workshop. Vanessa didn't answer his calls. She read his messages, but didn't respond to them either. In the evening, feeling uncertain and with no clear answers, Brandon went to his mistress's house. He waited until midnight for her to talk, but ended up falling asleep in the car. In the morning, a dishevelled Brandon woke up, squinted against the sunlight. He saw that Vanessa's car was not in the front of the yard, but then he noticed that the curtains on the windows had been moved. Filled with a sudden hunch, Brandon jumped out of the car and ran to the front door. He rang the bell several times. After about 10 minutes, he heard barely perceptible footsteps. "Why aren't you picking up the phone? I thought something had happened to you," he exclaimed as soon as Vanessa slightly opened the door without removing the chain. "Dear, let me in. What's going on?" "First, good morning," Vanessa greeted him in her cold voice. "Secondly, I've been busy." "Let's have a normal conversation. Let me in." Brandon was indignant once again. "Brandon, go home. Stop bothering me or I'll call the police," Vanessa informed him indifferently. "You can come for your things tonight when I've had some sleep and can spare a couple of minutes for you." "What? What do you mean?" Brandon squinted at the girl through the gap between the door and the wall. "You're not deaf, are you? That's good. Now, would you be so kind as to disappear? I need to get some sleep." Vanessa slammed the door right in his face. Shocked and unable to comprehend, Brandon stood on the porch. He started texting to her, then erased it, then wrote again, then spat, kicked the car tire, got behind the wheel, and started so fast that pebbles flew from under the wheels as he drove away. Meanwhile, Maya was sitting on the giant sofa in Casey's apartment. "He must have thought I was an easygoing woman," sighed Maya, "and he won't call again." Maya, who was busy with trimming dry leaves from her many houseplants, tried to encourage her friend. "You had a great time, though. A night with a man like that is worth dealing with your conscience." "I wish I could silence my conscience," Maya muttered, while at the same time she was lost in a languid reminiscence. 2 days ago, she had spent the night with Jarrett in his studio and saw the promised pink sunrise. It was like something out of the best melodramas. He had wrapped her in a blanket and brought her coffee, and then they sat on the balcony on the shaggy rug, hugging and admiring the rising sun. "Oh," snorted Casey, "Brandon's conscience probably doesn't bother him at all. By the way, are you thinking of filing for divorce?" "I don't know." Maya hesitated. "What do you mean you don't know?" Casey flicked her scissors indignantly. "Start building a life without him. And let him figure things out on his own." Maya rubbed the tassel of the plaid in her hands. Her friend was right. She didn't have any clear reasons to stay married, but taking the first step towards legal freedom was scary. Suddenly, her phone jingled with a new message. "He's inviting me to his exhibition at the gallery tomorrow," she exclaimed joyfully. "I told you, a sundress works wonders," laughed Casey. The next day, Jarrett met her at the gallery, smiled and kissed her on the cheek. The gallery was crowded. Tourists, seeking relief from the heat and thirsting for cultural entertainment, admired the artist's artwork. "You never told me you were organizing an exhibition," Maya said, scanning the room with its white walls and large windows. "And you never mentioned that you liked sunrises," Jarrett whispered in her ear. "Come, let me show you my best work." He took her hand, and they walked to the deepest part of the exhibit. There was a large oil painting of a girl barely covered by a sheet. The sun's rays played on her skin, and her hair cascaded over her shoulder in beautiful curls. Maya stared at the details, marvelling at the artwork, and suddenly it struck her. "Don't tell me it's me," she said, turning to Jarrett, who was standing behind her with a gentle smile. "I spent the whole day drawing it after you left. I barely ate. My paintbrush was constantly in my hand. I haven't had such an inspiration in a long time. You inspired this painting. I just transferred it to paper, and yesterday I decided to include it in the exhibition after all." Maya blinked in embarrassment, feeling a mix of embarrassment, admiration, and a pleasant thrill. "I would really like you to come with me to the capital for my second exhibition in 2 weeks," Jarrett said, holding her hand. "And also, I would like to speak about us as a couple." I need to think about everything," the woman replied, amazed by Jarrett's words. "I understand, and I won't rush you. Let's just enjoy today, okay?" Jarrett put an affectionate arm around her shoulders. Maya looked back at the painting. "I agree." Maya hugged Jarrett back and kissed his cheek. That night, Brandon didn't go to Vanessa's to collect his things. He was angry and didn't want to admit that the reason for their breakup was a dirty plate. What's wrong with that? Cleaning and washing dishes is a woman's job. That's how it's been done since ancient times. The man provides, and the woman takes care of the household. After a few days of waiting and calming down, Brandon decided to visit his mistress. He hoped for another attempt at a conversation. The man drove to Vanessa's house, called her, but got her answering machine, just like a few days before. The house windows were dark. Brandon decided to wait a little, and soon a familiar white SUV pulled into the parking lot in front of the house. Brandon hurried out of the car to catch Vanessa, wanting to talk to her without any formalities. But to his surprise, an unfamiliar man in a shirt and suit stepped out of the car. A few seconds later, Vanessa appeared herself. She looked slightly surprised at her worthless lover. Then she nodded at her companion and then approached Brandon leisurely. "Hi, your things are on the doorstep, in case you couldn't find them," she said dryly. "Vanessa, can we have a normal conversation?" Brandon persisted. "Who is this guy?" "I don't want to discuss anything with you. Everything is clear to me without additional conversations," the woman replied. "And this is my client. We won a very important case, and we were going to celebrate." Brandon felt his anger boiling inside. "You choose this dandy over me," he said, gesturing dramatically. Vanessa rolled her eyes tiredly, then let out a sigh. She approached Brandon and adjusted the collar of his polo shirt. "Brandon, you think too highly of yourself. I didn't ask you to leave your wife, which you happily announced. I was just bored. I was looking for a nice evening's entertainment, and you stuck to me like a leaf. And you're showing your temper in a situation that's totally unfavourable to you. Do you think I'm going to put up with that? Trust me, it's better for you to take your few things that have been left at my place and go away." Brandon got a lump in his throat and a sickening stabbing in his chest. "You can't throw me out like that." "I already kicked you out a couple of days ago," Vanessa replied indifferently. "And by the way, the completed order I'm waiting for will arrive in 14 days, according to the terms of the contract, or you will finish it for free." "What?" Brandon stared at her. "You should have read the terms and conditions, Kitty." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Otherwise, I'll sue you. I'd hate to waste my time on this, of course, but terms are terms." She turned away, waving her hand. The conversation was over. Brendan was left alone in the parking lot. He was utterly trampled and finally awake. He clenched his fist and got into the car, deciding not to take his things, to avoid humiliating himself even further. Maya paced back and forth through the room of her apartment. Inside, conflicting feelings of duty, conscience, public opinion, and new feelings for another person battled. Casey also persuaded her to maintain a relationship with Jarrett. "Agree, little fool. You have a man who is educated, creative, handsome, and not poor. He fell in love with you at first sight, and you're still thinking." "I know, Casey," Maya sighed, "but I am really afraid." She didn't have an opportunity to continue because there was a knock on the apartment door. She opened the door and stunned. "Brandon?" Maya stepped back instinctively. "What are you doing here?" I want to make up, Brandon declared. Let's talk, okay? May I come in? He was about to cross the threshold when Maya blocked his path. The man looked perplexed at his ex-wife. What are you doing, Maya? There was so much disregard for her in this phrase that Maya felt disgusted. The puzzle pieces had come together. This is my apartment, Brandon, Maya reminded him. If you want to talk, let's talk in the park, for example. Okay, Brandon agreed sourly. Maya closed the door and exhaled, leaning back against its surface. 5 minutes later, she was outside. Brandon was sitting on a bench in the shade of fragrant bushes in front of the apartment building and nervously tapping on the wooden bars of the seat. I'm listening, Brandon, Maya said, taking a seat next to him. Outwardly, Maya appeared calm, but inside everything was boiling. I left her, and I want us to be together again. Forgive me. Brandon spoke with the same self-confident voice. And you think I'm going to take you back with open arms? Maya folded her arms across her chest. Well, I've apologized. Brandon didn't understand what else she wanted from him. In a week, you might want to have another woman and go back to her, Maya continued. No, thank you. I'm not interested in a relationship with you anymore. Maya, trust me, I'm not going to find anyone else, said Brandon. What if I say yes? I will have the same greyness of everyday life, arguments over women's and non-women's work, and other forms of neglect from him, Maya said. Everyone lives like that. Brandon shrugged his shoulders. My parents, other families, and no one complains. Don't speak for everyone, Maya interrupted him. Maya, please forgive me. I did a stupid thing. What else do you want? Brandon looked at her, anguished and a little irritated. His face showed that he expected the situation to be resolved more easily and quickly. I don't need anything from you anymore except divorce, Maya said firmly. I realized that life could be different. What could be different? Brandon was wary. Everything. From attitude to me, to dishwashing. I don't want to go back to the swamp you prepared for me. But we're still married. Hey! A stunned Brandon jumped up from the bench. Where are you going? Forward, to a happy life. Maya spoke briefly and confidently walked away. It was so easy to do what had seemed impossible a month ago. September on the coast was still the tourist season, and there were fewer people and quieter beaches. The sun had warmed, the sea sparkled with silver, and the greenery was riotous. When you get there, text me immediately, Casey reminded her friend for the third time. I will text, call, and send pictures, Maya joked. You're so worried, as if you were the one leaving. I have an aerophobia, even when I'm the one on the ground, and the people close to me are in the sky. Casey nervously shook her head. I don't trust those flying things. And do you trust me? Jarrett appeared behind Maya's back, looking at Casey with a questioning gaze. Casey grinned at him, assessing him from head to toe, and then spoke. Considering how Maya started shining with you, yes, I trust you. The announcement for boarding the flight to the capital echoed through the airport. Maya and Jarrett hurriedly made their way towards the gate. The engines roared as the aircraft lifted off the ground, carrying its passengers through the air. Maya was captivated by the view outside the window, admiring the beautiful coastline from a bird's-eye perspective. I think I've become a fan of flying, Maya exclaimed with enthusiasm. I'm glad to be by your side during such an important moment. Jarrett laughed and held her hand. Maya leaned back in her seat as the plane ascended above the clouds and the earth disappeared. The past week had been quite eventful for her. Firstly, she changed the lock on her front door. Brandon couldn't accept no for an answer and had attempted to enter her home at night with his key. He persisted, knocking, pleading and swearing for a long time, but eventually left in the morning. Secondly, she filed for divorce. And thirdly, Maya accepted Jarrett's offer to visit his exhibition in the capital. Although he was glad, he noticed a slight hesitation in her eyes. Jarrett tightly embraced her and said, "Thank you, sweetheart, that you trusted me. I will do everything to make you happy with me." Maya hugged Jarrett tightly. She was already happy. She had the best man next to her and an interesting life ahead of her.